Welcome back, YouTubers. This is an update overview video of the DIY Powerwall and where we're up to and kind of where we want to get to and what goals. What I'll do is I'll try and answer as many of maybe some of the questions that have come up along the way, and this is really just an overview of where we're up to, what our goals are, where we want to get to, how far through we are. What I'll do is I'll put up on here the different items that we'll cover off on this video, and hopefully we'll do a few more videos later down the track just like this, a bit of a recap. Obviously we've still got our other videos that come out throughout the weeks, which is just as little bits get ticked off and as we put bits and pieces together, but it's obviously needed to have a bit of an overview for those that are joining the channel, and if you haven't, obviously subscribe. But this is kind of what we want to achieve and how we're going to get there. So grid-tie inverter. So why did I choose the grid-tie inverter over here? Well, it really comes down to the first part of the project, which is putting solar on the roof of the house. What I've got is I've got 4.8 kilowatts of solar, which is pretty much split between 20 240 watt solar panels. I ended up buying them in a pallet of 23. When you're buying brand new solar panels, it's cheaper to buy them in a pallet than it is to buy them individually. Well, that's how it is in New Zealand anyway. I can imagine that's the same in most places. So I've got 4.8 kilowatts on the roof. That goes to a 5 kilowatt grid-tie inverter. That's the Solar X one, which I've previewed in other videos, and I've got all the monitoring and all the bits and pieces set up for that. So that's pretty much the very first start of the project, which was just getting solar, getting it on the roof, getting it set up and getting it working. So that's also given me some experience with grid-tie inverters and how they work, and which is why it created the idea of using a grid-tie inverter for the DIY Powerwall, which has got obviously batteries connected to the DC side of the grid-tie inverter. Now the difference really is that the grid-tie inverter that I'm using here has a limiter built in. They come with a limiter that's not built in, but the main big grid-tie inverters are only just that. They're grid-tie inverters. They don't have limiters. Whatever DC power you put into them, they'll turn into AC. They're pretty much very simple like that. But that doesn't work very well when you put batteries on it or into it, because otherwise the grid-tie inverter is going to put out as much as it can and it's going to drain the batteries pretty fast. So that's why it's really important to use a grid-tie inverter. Now the other thing is that why did I use a grid-tie inverter over using an off-grid inverter or hybrid inverter? Well, that's a good question. I think I've answered it a couple of times in the forum, but the main reason for that was what I wanted was the flexibility of the grid-tie inverter. The grid-tie inverters are fantastic because they're really simple. All you do is you plug one end into the AC socket and you apply DC to the other end of it, and away it goes. You can pretty much take it with you, you can move it around, you can do whatever you like. It's not necessarily a heck of a lot of work to set up and to get going. Obviously with the off-grid inverter or a hybrid inverter or anything like that, the voltages are lower, which obviously means that there's more current, thicker cables and all that type of thing. So I thought I'd do things a little bit different. I thought, well, if I could use higher voltages in my setup, it's got a charge or max charge voltage of 83 volts. So by having a much higher voltage, the current's a lot less. When this inverter's drawing or producing 2000 watts or 1930 watts or whatever it is, it's sitting at around 31 to 32 amps. So that's a lot lower than if it was a 24 volt or 48 volt system. So that was my ideas around using a grid-tie inverter. The other thing is that it's pretty much you buy the product and you plug it into a normal AC socket. There's no complications. I didn't need to get an electrician. I didn't need to do all those other bits and pieces. If I had an off-grid inverter, I would have had to do that. I would have had to put it possibly inside the house, and I would have had to connect it up to the main switchboard. So by using this, that means I could put the whole thing out in the garage, which is actually about 5 meters away from the house. So it's nice and simple. So that was the reason for using that, as well as the fact that this is 45 volts to 90 volts on the input. So that meant that I could have a much higher voltage for my batteries than otherwise I would have with maybe the 48 volt system. However, it does complicate things when trying to charge the batteries, and it does create a whole raft of other issues, which maybe overall the complexity of the other issues might have outweighed the simplistic nature of the grid-tie inverter. As I said, if it's under 2000 watts, you can just plug it into a normal AC outlet because they support up to 2400 watts. So that kind of covers that off. The next thing is the battery bank. So what I've got is I've got the 5 kilowatts done, the first bank of 5 kilowatts. What I thought I'd do is I'd break them up into banks, and there'll be 3 in total. So that way 3 sets of 5 kilowatts. Rather than just creating a 10 kilowatt bank, what I thought I'd do is at least break it up so that I could actually get the project up and running and getting it working without trying to wait until I get to the point that everything is kind of done before actually turning it on. So by doing it in stages, it meant that I can at least get 5 kilowatts working, which is going to make a bit of a dent on the Powerwall, and it's going to make it pretty much means that I can test, I can get things going, I can focus on all the other fundamental things within the project, and then adding battery banks after that is just going to be a matter of soldering it up and plugging it in, because the foundations of what I've created is already there. So that's kind of what was needed for the first 5 kilowatts. So 5 kilowatts is done, it's working. This is how the grid-tie inverter looks when it's up and running. So what I did was I did it for a 2-hour test. What we've got is 8:30 here and then 9:30, which is roughly around when I turned it on. I ran it until around midnight, and this is pretty much a kilowatt of use. So the thing that I've got with my monitoring currently is that it's obviously not going to show me the power that the grid-tie inverter is actually putting back into the system. I'll need to do that later down the track. But what we do see here is that the power is sitting at around 600 watts, and this is with watching the TV. And obviously what happens is that I turn it on and the house utilization drops down to 100 and something watts down here. Now it sits at 100 watts. Now that's mainly because the extended CT clamp. So when it's looking at 600 watts, it's pretty much got a buffer of 120, somewhere around there, watts. So obviously what we're doing is we're still buying power, a small amount of power, but we're buying the power at 120 watts, and the rest of it, the difference from the 600 and something watts down to here, is what the grid-tie inverter is seeing and is putting back into the system. So that what you'll end up seeing over here is that when I turned it back on again, it will start off pretty much from where we stopped here. So it'd be nice to have some more monitoring set up so that we know exactly how much power is in this gap that we can't obviously see. You can see it at a time by looking at the LCD screen on the grid-tie inverter, but you can't really see it now. So I need to put some systems in place for me to be able to see that, just like I normally would see if for the solar production throughout the day. So what you can, the other thing to point out is this is where we turn the kettle on, and you'll see that it went up to 1000 watts. And what happens is that obviously the grid-tie inverter can put out as much as it can, and the difference is this amount of power here. So that's really the difference that obviously we had to buy. Now I'm not exactly sure what that was. I'm pretty sure it was the kettle, or it could have been the microwave. I can't remember, but either way the load was higher than 1930 watts. So this whole period of time worked really well. It was a really good test, and it pretty much was 1 kilowatt hour that was used, and that was what it was reading on the screen of the grid-tie inverter. So yeah, that's a bit of it was my longest test yet, pretty much a 2-hour period or just over, and you're really happy with those results. So I just thought I'd let you know, and just so you could see on my monitoring how it actually looks and what actually happens. But yeah, moving on to the next part. So the next thing that's kind of come up is the charger. So the first thing is that I have this problem because I'm at 83 volts. The issue is that how do I charge that type of system? All the off-the-shelf products like the MPPT solar charge controllers, the issue is that they are only suited for 48 volts. And you can get you can get slightly more voltage out of them, 54 or whatever it is, but you can't get up to 80. And obviously I'm needing 83, to get to the voltage that I need to charge. So the problem I've got is just that, how do I charge? What I thought I'd do is I'd create a simple way to at least charge the first bank on the Powerwall, and that way I can use it for testing, and I can use it in the interim while I figure out how I'm going to create a proper charger that'll charge from solar. So what I thought I'd do is I'd create a very powerful power supply, which then runs into a DC to DC boost converter, which gives me my constant current and my constant voltage. I can set those parameters and I can have that charging. Yes, it's obviously coming from AC to boost converter, DC to DC boost converter, and then from that to the Powerwall. So the efficiencies aren't so flash. However, it does mean that I can charge the Powerwall, I can get things going, I can test it throughout the day. I mean, when it runs down, I can then charge it back up again. It would be completely impossible to do that without using an IMAX B6, in which case it'll take 2 weeks to charge, and by then it just takes too long between charging and testing. So what I thought I'd do is I had to create a system that would charge the Powerwall quickly, and also a system that I could potentially use later down the track to top up the Powerwall if needed or as needed. So it would be a great idea to obviously to use solar to then charge the Powerwall, and that's the ultimate goal, is to use only solar to charge the Powerwall. Now, because I've got 4.8 kilowatts on the house, and because after the hot water's boiled and all those other bits and pieces, then the second half of the day, especially on a sunny day, we're just exporting that power back to the grid. So by turning on the AC power supply and charging the Powerwall, I can use some of the excess power that I'm actually just sending off to the grid and getting, let's just say, 7 cents a kilowatt for. I can use that and charge the Powerwall, which is effectively just charging it directly pretty much from the solar panels. However, obviously there's some efficiency losses while trying to go from DC to AC, then back to AC to DC, and then through boost converter and then to the Powerwall. So it's not a fantastic solution, but it does mean that I could actually, right now, if I turn the charger on during the day, because of all the solar on the main house, it is actually charging from the solar that's on the main house, and I'm not having to pay for that, or it's not charging from the grid. So, and potentially what I was at the start of this, what I could do is that I could put a controller on there that's constantly looking at what the house is exporting, and if the house is exporting, let's just say, over 2 kilowatts, to then turn the power supply on. And after, if the house drops exporting 2 kilowatts, then turn the charger off. I could do things like that. It's not the best idea, and that was something that I was kind of just mildly thinking about. But the ultimate idea is to put some solar panels on the garage roof, and that way have the garage roof to a MPPT solar charge controller, which then charges the Powerwall. And if I need to top it up at some point, I can just turn the power supply on and charge it with the boost converter. So it gives me some flexibility. Also, I could, if I don't have enough solar panels on the garage roof, or I haven't got to that stage yet, I could have the solar panels on the garage roof charging the Powerwall, and then if it's a really sunny day, I can also turn on the boost converter with the 2000 watt power supply, and I could use the house power that's being generated to also power will also charge the Powerwall. So it just gives me some options, and that was the real purpose of creating that charger. One, it gets me going, gets me charging, and it gets me to a point I can do some testing. And two, long term, it actually could be useful. So it wasn't such a bad idea, and that's kind of what I did around the charger and why we did those series of videos around that build. So the next part really is the controller. So what I need to do is I need to create a system to be able to manage this grid-tie inverter as well as manage the batteries. Now this grid-tie inverter, just like any other grid-tie inverter, is just very simple. A grid-tie inverter, it takes the DC and turns it into the AC. It doesn't care what the battery voltage is. It doesn't care, normally because it's a solar panel, what the voltage is. It just tries to turn as much of that DC into AC. That's its job. So what we need to do, and by using a grid-tie inverter, we need to come up with a system or controller that then now manages the batteries, it needs to know what the battery voltage is, it needs to know how much current's coming off the batteries, it needs to know whether it's nighttime or daylight, it needs to know whether to turn the grid tie inverter on or off. For example, we need to know the voltages so that we can graph them, so we can see what the voltages are doing overnight. When it gets down to 60 volts, for example, or the low voltage, which is 3 volts per cell, it needs to then turn off the grid tie inverter. Otherwise, obviously, it's just going to keep going flat until its minimum, which is 45 volts. So we need a way to make sure it gets turned off when the batteries start getting flat. We also need a way for it to turn on when it's nighttime and not turn on during the day. And so what we need to do is create a controller or a BMS unit that does just that. It'll also be good later on down the track to create cell monitors to then monitor each of the 20 banks or the 20 packs within the first bank. So that part's kind of in the list, but the controller part is the more important part. It's kind of the foundation on making this work without having to come in here manually and turn it on and off. So, and obviously the important part is we need to know that if the batteries drop in voltage, that that it gets turned off, rather than watching TV and forgetting to look at it. So it all needs to be automated, and there's no kind of complete system that you can just buy to actually make that work, because we're doing something that not everyone kind of does. Not everyone uses a grid tie inverter with batteries and an automated system. So what I've had to do is use an Arduino to then, or program the Arduino to do what we want it to do. So I've got a little screen. I'll show you the next clip, which will be in the room, just kind of with things out on the bed, trying to create something and try to get it working, and you'll see where I'm up to. But it's pretty much what I'm needing is a system that monitors the voltage, monitors the current, sends it to an online system so that I can monitor the voltage throughout the night or throughout the day, know how much charge has gone into the batteries, and see it on a second by second or on a minute by minute basis, so that I can see how things are tracking. And as the Powerwall gets more banks, we'll be able to see exactly what's kind of happening. And obviously with the added function of the cell monitoring. So that's been a big part. It's taken me a good month to kind of get to the point that I am now, and it's still not perfect. It's slightly, it's almost there. So I'm excited to actually get it almost there and to almost put it into test. But what I'll do is I'll quickly show you that video, what I've just done. It was a couple of nights ago, and we'll come back. Right, so the controller, this is my BMS kind of part that I've started to build. So if I just zoom into that, you'll kind of see what I've got there. So I've got the voltage and the amps and the state of the AC SSR. The numbers are jumping around a little bit right now, but don't worry about that. That's mainly because I've just changed some code and got things unplugged. We've also got a current sensor. This is a 100 amp current sensor that it was one hell of a job to solder that. But anyway, that's soldered up. I've also got a voltage divider here, which has got 83 volts coming in on this side, and then on this side it's currently about 4 volts, but I want to change the voltage divider a little bit. But in the meantime, that'll do. That's just coming off a boost converter, which is up there, that big boost converter that I ended up getting going. This whole thing is going to sit into maybe this case, nice little black case with some screws at the back, so that'll screw onto the wall out in the garage. I didn't have the screen coming in through there somehow. So that part that's how that's looking. If I flick you across the screen, so this is kind of where I've got to with this. It's live, it's on the website. It's so I've got the amps at the top, voltage down the bottom, the graph of how it's been going in the last hour, current in the last hour. These haven't been populated with anything yet. This is just a very quick draft to make sure I'm seeing the numbers that I should be. This is live, but that's the grid currently. The house, how much we're getting off the solar. It's almost dark, so that's why it's down to 107 watts. And then there's the code, which is just showing me the serial interface. And so that's kind of how that's looking. So it's all coming together slowly. It's just taking a very long time when I don't know how to program, and I've just got no idea. So I'm pretty much having to watch YouTube videos and do lots of Googling to to be able to get to the point that I've got with the code to do what I'm doing. So it's sending off to this website every 30 seconds, and this website's logging it and graphing it every 30 seconds or so. So that'll be good once it's all up and going. But that's how that's going and the progress here is a little bit slow, but we are getting there, mainly because I just don't know really what I'm doing, so it's just taking a long time to figure things out, but it's a good learning experience. So yeah, so as you see from that video, we're almost there. I've got a bit further since then, that was taken a couple of days ago, so I've got a little bit further. I've got to the point that the voltages are stable on the current monitoring. The voltage monitoring, however, has a little bit of fluctuation, so I still need to sort that out, but we're almost there with the current monitoring, to the point that it's almost ready to kind of put into a box and put it up here for more testing. The issue that I've currently got, and the issue that I've got with it, is because we're monitoring, or because we're getting two analog readings. What happens is that as soon as you get one analog reading, everything's fine. As soon as you start getting the second analog reading, it mucks the numbers up from the first analog reading. So what I've done is I've kind of put some timers in there so that one system runs and then the other one runs and then back and forth, so that there's not so much of an overlap, in which case the voltages and or the current is more stable. So that's kind of where we're getting to. We're almost there. Fingers crossed we'll have that done in the next week, and then I can be able to test that. But yeah, having it all web-based, being able to have all that functionality is exactly what we need. I'll improve on how it looks on the web-based thing later down the track. It's just very basic. Let's just get it going, because I want to be able to start using this. So the next thing on the list is sound monitoring. The sound monitoring is obviously slightly down the list. Obviously getting the controller up and going first is a priority, because that's just going to make the system work. Sound monitoring is also very important because we really want to see what the voltages are on each of those 20 packs. What I've got all the components for it. What I need to do though is design a circuit board to be able to put them all on. Trying to do them soldered wires, or little wires, bits and pieces, it's just going to be far too messy when you have to times that by 20. So what I want to do is I need to create my own circuit board, put all the bits, all the components on that, and that way it'll have a nice plug, be able to plug it in and out, and that will do all the sound monitoring. It'll be a separate unit, mainly because there's just not enough ports. It'll have to be using Arduino Mega, and it's not enough ports on the current one that I've got. Either way, I'm going to still need to use two. So I've got that in place. I've tested with sound monitoring with two battery banks, and that works fine. So it's just a matter of expanding it out to 20. It does actually mean that I'm going to have to do that by 20, and then by another 20, and then by a third 20. So I kind of need to create my design on the first one to be able to expand, or create 3 separate units of 20, because the unfortunate thing about having 20 battery packs is that that's 20 times as much work when compared to the 48 volt systems, where obviously you've got a heck of a lot less banks to get to 48 rather than having 20. So sound monitoring, it's on the cards. It's going to happen. It's slightly down the list. Getting the foundations on this part here working and getting the system up and going is kind of the key part, or the key important thing. After that is obviously starting on the second bank, and then obviously starting on the third bank. I've got enough cells to get the second bank kind of up and going, but all this other stuff really needs to be done first before even kind of thinking about the second or third bank. So getting this system running on a nightly basis is really what we want to get to. So that's a bit of an update for you guys. It's a bit of an overview, and put some questions in if you'd like me to answer anything else. Everyone's been great. Thanks for the support, and we're slowly getting there with the system, and it's slowly up and running. So yeah, thanks everyone, and remember to subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.